There is no doubt about it that the pushing back and the defeat of this right-wing coup, even though it took a while, in Bolivia is probably one of the best, the most inspiring stories of the past couple of years. But it's worthwhile, and I think Matt can take us through this a little bit, remind people, and even now we're getting more evidence of just how much worse things could have gotten, despite already being extremely bad.
Yeah, so we have the story here from The Intercept. I'm going to share. Bolivian ex-minister of defense plotted a second coup using U.S. mercenaries. And let me just give you some of the dramatis personae here. So first we have Luis Fernando Lopez. He's a former paratrooper and businessman, and Inez named him defense minister last fall. And we also have Joe Pereira, a civil administrator with the U.S. Army and organizer of this mission, basically these requests, who boasts of links to U.S. Special Forces. And the overall, basically, Intercept found these recordings, and the request was things like this defense minister saying, we are trying to fight the annihilation of our country by this democratic process that brought Arce to power. And so we are going to, coordinate. We're going to tell the police and military that just stand down when we bring in C-130 Hercules planes from Miami filled with mercenaries, 10,000 which else is commented later that a little bit far-fetched, some of these numbers. Maybe maybe think a little bit too grandiose. Some Bay of Pigs style delusion maybe by these guys. But ultimately, Arce won, and they didn't pull the coup off. But the amount of, you have this defense minister saying people will say 95 to 98% of the high-level military people will accept a coup here. There might be a few Mas people, but otherwise we're good to go. And it should be, for anybody who doesn't remember, Morales was intimidated through violence, paramilitary violence, out of office in the first place, right? So this is just literally a more brazen.
When the generals ask you to leave.
Right, and people are getting what was it? The Intercept has this at the end of the story. Was it 19 people died? 19 demonstrators were shot dead over the course of that. So it's Morales could have held on and let them just murder more and more demonstrators, but he got intimidated out of office, and ultimately it turned out well because he didn't commit fraud. That was exposed, and then Arce won, and I think this sort of reaction, the coup studies, that's going to be a big part of left-wing politics, I think, probably for the next 10 or 20 years.
I mean, I think that's I like that. It's a very hopeful way to frame it. It's this is a really beautiful, it's beautiful might be the wrong word because it's, horrific and there's a lot of pain and suffering. But this was a coup that was successfully thwarted. This was a horrible right-wing reactionary movement that came into power briefly, but was not able to maintain it. And it was because of the richness of the social movements, the righteousness of the left, and the fact that it was just completely absurd, the allegations of electoral fraud.
You hear the reaction from military or U.S. sort of side people, and it's this is the last thing this area needs, which is to me seems a little bit too conditional. Actually, there might be times where this is the medicine that it needs, but just right now is not the opportune times to send in a Blackwater 2 to say, hey, we're going to just undo this election, which was making up for a coup election under a year ago.
I mean, it's so funny. To read the kind of messages that are being sent back and forth, though, in this Intercept article, to see there's a little bit of initial appetite, but as things start to develop, the Americans who are just so callous and cold and cruel, just start to realize though, that despite all their desires to get involved, that it seems like the people who want more and more U.S. military forces there are a little full of it.
That's the only way that any of this happens globally, is that the people are too much, because they will try to fuck it. Like the forces of reaction are conspiring all the time, and so somebody who's arrested now for it said that Trump approved it. Now, whether Trump approved it or not, Trump is approving of it, as is like the general U.S. empire, which is to say they might not have signed specific papers, and they might have been concerned about, the appear. Basically, the guy said, we don't want to look like we're supporting this, but if maybe mercenaries flew out of Miami, military base, then that's a little bit better, right? But it's like they want to do it, and we have the infrastructure to invade stuff with new planes, but ultimately, Bolivia, all these places, you need to get to the point where they can't have that option, even though they wish it was in the cards, basically.
No, exactly. And just one more thing too, is that you start to see just how much of a peppering in the United States there are of like Bolivians who are willing to make war on their own country, in order to make sure that the democratic will wasn't respected, which should be a good reminder for all of the folks who were sort of bamboozled by Bolivian Twitter accounts that were started right as the coup was beginning, that mainly tweeted in English about like the cruelty of Morales. That if there was appetite for people to be showing up with planes and tanks and guns, there's certainly going to be people who are going to willing to to tweet and mislead folks. Which is just another good lesson for people to remember, because it's almost it's a little bit of a joke on our side, but like it is incredible how quickly those forces present themselves on like social media as like, oh no, I'm actually like the true authentic voice of all of these people, and we actually want the United States to come in and invade my country and overthrow democracy. People I think are starting to realize that a lot of that is BS.
Yeah, there needs to be an update on. Remember that? I never read it, but the Dictator's Learning Curve that came out, which is about how dictators are adapting to like social media and stuff like that.
No,
but like there needs to be like the Empire's burner account, or something like that, where you get all these like it's always like on demand. People say, I got into this with a bunch of El Salvadorian accounts, or like people who are like saying, actually this is going to help me on remittances, the Bitcoin stuff, right? And like my point is, one, I don't know if that will scale up. It's still a sliver of remittances, and Bitcoin, my problem, from my understanding, has a problem with scale. But if you can use it to get around banks fees for a while, like Godspeed. But like that is not, I don't think, why a lot of these people are supporting Bitcoin, for instance. But maybe I'm digressing a little bit.
And maybe as a last point here, I just want to say about Bolivia, and I'll say it time and time again, that if you look at what's been happening since Massa's come back into power, there has been a focus on not just reforming the military, but purging it of pro right-wing forces, of reshuffling and fundamentally reorganizing both the police force and the military. And there's some people in the U.S. leftists who don't recognize why this is a critical thing to do when you have the ability to do it. I'm sorry, look at what happened over this past year. Look at the main perpetrators of this system. It wasn't popular movements. It was a super wealthy elite backed by international capital and U.S. interests, using not necessarily like the people on the ground, the everyday rank and file of the army, but the elites, people high up in these systems. So of course you need to eradicate those kind of things. And people need to recognize that it's something that is extremely important. And almost every left-wing project that has had serious threats of, coup attempts or things like that has had to either make a decision about if they are going to fundamentally take military power into democratic public control, or allow it to operate as, a second shadow government, right? And yeah, I don't know. It's just a serious question. I think a lot of people just like they freak out whenever somebody talks about like reform, like as if the military is some, essential, holy part of democracy that, like how conservatives get worked about the Constitution, right? I'm just saying like leftists need to understand that like these things are serious questions. They're not just kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's the one thing, like from the sort of Enlightenment founding father area of social studies,
Yeah,
seventh
exactly.
grade, where it's like standing army is bad. Like let's bring that back, folks.
And and last thing too, just one thing that I thought was there's so many disgusting things that the coup government did, but one of the things that really fucking pissed me off was they destroyed the anti-imperialist military academy that Evo had been developing, right? Where people were basically like military commanders or people who were going to rise up into higher offices in the military. We're going to be educated in like anti-imperialism and like socialism and like Bolivar and like Fanon and all of these kind of really critical anti-imperialist leaders. And like one of the first things they did was eradicate that. So understand that the right wing is very afraid of these things, and the right.
Yeah, that sounds like they should have like Daniel Bessner consult on that. Seems like the exact sort of thing he'd like.